I found the notice taped to my garage door when I got home from work on a freezing Tuesday evening in Anchorage, Alaska. And my blood pressure spiked the moment I read the first line demanding I surrender my snow machine to the Homeowners Association for community patrol purposes. My name is Quentin Vance, and I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the North Slope oil fields. I was tired, cold, and the last thing I needed was dealing with whatever nonsense our HOA president had cooked up this time. The notice was printed on official-looking letterhead, with the Mountain Ridge HOA logo emblazoned across the top. Below it, in bold letters, it stated that all residents with snow machines were required to register them with the association and make them available for neighborhood security patrols during winter months. I crumpled the paper in my fist and stormed inside my house, kicking snow off my boots as I went. My golden retriever, Sam, bounded up to greet me, but I barely had the energy to pet him. I threw my gear on the couch and pulled out my phone, immediately calling my neighbor and friend, Marcus Chen, who lived 3 houses down. "Did you get one of these insane notices?" I asked the moment he picked up. "About the snow machines." "Yeah, man." "Patricia's lost her mind this time," Marcus said, referring to Patricia Newman, our HOA president. "She's claiming there's been an increase in property crimes and that we need organized patrols. Apparently, she thinks our personal snow machines should become community property." "That's not how property ownership works," I said, feeling my jaw tighten. "I'm still making payments on mine. It's financed through Arctic Federal Credit Union and I pay full coverage insurance every month. She can't just demand I hand it over. You know Patricia. She thinks being HOA president means she runs a dictatorship," Marcus replied with a sigh. "There's a meeting tomorrow night at the community center. 7 o'clock. I'd say we should both be there." I agreed and hung up, then walked to my garage to look at my snow machine. It was a 2024 Polaris Switchback Assault, jet black with custom blue striping. I had saved for 2 years to afford the down payment, and I still owed $18,000 on it. The machine was my primary transportation during harsh winter conditions when the roads became impassable. I used it to get to the airstrip where I caught flights to the North Slope for work. It wasn't some toy or luxury item. It was essential. The next evening, I arrived at the community center 15 minutes early. The building was a modest structure with log siding, typical of Alaskan architecture, with a parking lot that was currently being consumed by the season's heavy snowfall. Several other residents had already gathered inside, their faces showing varying degrees of confusion and irritation. I spotted Marcus near the back and joined him. "This should be interesting," he muttered as Patricia Newman entered through the side door. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone says, "HOA Karen." She was in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob that looked like it had been styled with a level to ensure perfect straightness. She wore a burgundy pantsuit and carried a leather-bound planner that she clutched like a Bible. Her lips were pursed in a permanent expression of disapproval, and her eyes scanned the room like a hawk looking for violations. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia began, her voice sharp and authoritative. "I'm glad to see such excellent turnout. It shows that our community members take security seriously." "We take property rights seriously," someone called out from the middle of the room. A few people chuckled. Patricia's expression hardened. "Yes, well, property rights come with community responsibilities. As outlined in the notices distributed yesterday, the HOA board has voted to implement a mandatory neighborhood watch program utilizing resident-owned snow machines." I raised my hand. "Patricia, I didn't receive any notification about a board vote. When did this happen?" She flipped through her planner with exaggerated patience. The emergency board meeting was held on Sunday evening. All procedures were followed according to our bylaws. Sunday evening, Marcus said. That's when most people are getting ready for the work week. And you're required to give 72 hours notice for any board meeting. Patricia's face flushed slightly. It was an emergency session. The bylaws allow for expedited meetings in cases of community safety concerns. What emergency? I asked, standing up. What specific incidents are you talking about? There have been reports, Patricia said vaguely, waving her hand dismissively. Multiple reports of suspicious activity. Vehicles driving slowly through the neighborhood. Footprints in yards. We need to be proactive. An elderly man named George Hartley spoke up from the front row. I've lived here for 15 years. We've never needed patrols before, and you certainly can't just commandeer people's private property. This isn't commandeering, Patricia insisted, her voice rising. This is community cooperation. Those who refuse to participate will face fines according to our covenant regulations. Which regulation? I demanded. Show me the exact bylaw that gives you authority to seize private property. Patricia's assistant, a mousy woman named Linda who always sat beside her taking notes, whispered something in her ear. Patricia nodded and addressed the room again. Section 12. Subsection 4 of our covenant states that residents must contribute to the overall safety and maintenance of the community. The board has interpreted this to include participation in patrol activities. That's about mowing lawns and clearing snow from sidewalks, Marcus shot back. It has nothing to do with forcing people to surrender expensive equipment. The meeting devolved into chaos after that, with residents shouting questions and objections while Patricia tried to maintain order by banging a gavel against the podium. Finally, she held up her hands and declared that the decision was final and that residents had until Friday to register their snow machines with the HOA office. Failure to comply would result in a $500 fine per day. I left the meeting furious and immediately drove to my lawyer's office the next morning. Jennifer Ortiz specialized in property law and had helped me with my home purchase 3 years ago. Her office was in downtown Anchorage, in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Cook Inlet. This is absurd, Jennifer said after I explained the situation. She was a sharp woman in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back in a professional ponytail. HOAs have authority over common areas and can enforce reasonable architectural standards, but they absolutely cannot force you to surrender titled property, especially property that's financed and insured privately. So what do? I asked. First, don't comply. Second, send a formal letter to the HOA board stating that you will not be registering your snow machine because it's privately financed through Arctic Federal Credit Union, and you're the legal owner according to the state title. Make it clear that any attempt to seize or fine you will result in legal action. She drafted the letter right there, and I sent it via certified mail that afternoon. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Friday morning, I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine idling in my driveway. I looked out my bedroom window and felt my stomach drop. There was a flatbed tow truck parked next to my garage, and Patricia Newman stood beside it with Linda and 2 men I didn't recognize. They were trying to open my garage door. I threw on clothes and ran outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Patricia turned to me with a smug expression. "Mr. Vance, since you failed to register your snow machine by the deadline, the HOA is exercising its right to secure community resources." "You're exercising exactly nothing," I said, stepping between them and my garage. "That snow machine is my private property. You have no legal right to touch it." We have every right according to our covenants, Patricia insisted. Now please step aside, or we'll have no choice but to call the authorities for obstruction. Go ahead and call them, I said, pulling out my phone. I'll call them too, and my lawyer, and maybe the local news while I'm at it. One of the men with Patricia, a burly guy in a Carhartt jacket, stepped forward. Look, buddy, we're just doing what we were hired to do. Make it easy on yourself. You're trespassing, I said firmly. I'm telling you right now to leave my property immediately. Patricia's face turned red. This is exactly the kind of uncooperative attitude that makes neighborhoods deteriorate. You signed the HOA covenants when you purchased your home. That means you agreed to follow the rules. I agreed to maintain my property and pay my dues, I countered. I didn't agree to hand over my personal vehicles. Now leave before I press charges for attempted theft. The standoff lasted another 5 minutes before Patricia finally ordered the tow truck to leave. But as she walked back to her car, she called over her shoulder, "You'll be hearing from our attorney, Mr. Vance, and the fines start today." True to her word, I received a formal notice later that day stating I was being fined $500 per day for non-compliance. The notice was delivered by Linda, who looked uncomfortable as she handed me the envelope. "I'm sorry, Quentin," she said quietly. "I told Patricia this wasn't right, but she wouldn't listen." "Then why do you keep working for her?" I asked. Linda sighed. "Someone has to keep the HOA running. And I keep hoping she'll see reason eventually." I called Jennifer immediately and forwarded her the fine notice. She was livid. "This is harassment," she said. "We're filing for a restraining order and an injunction, and I'm going to request that the court review the entire HOA board's conduct." Over the next week, the situation escalated rapidly. Patricia sent daily fine notices, each one adding another $500 to my alleged debt. The total quickly climbed to $3,500, but she didn't stop there. She started posting notices around the neighborhood claiming I was undermining community safety and encouraging other residents to shun me. Marcus told me that Patricia had been going door to door trying to turn neighbors against me, claiming I was selfish and putting everyone at risk by not participating in the patrol program. Most people saw through her nonsense, but a few of the newer residents who didn't know better started giving me cold looks when I passed them on the street. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for the following Wednesday at the Anchorage District Court. Jennifer prepared a comprehensive brief detailing Patricia's overreach and including copies of my Snowmachine title, financing agreement with Arctic Federal Credit Union, and insurance policy through State Farm. The documents clearly showed that the machine was my private property with no connection whatsoever to the HOA or any community resources. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best suit and met Jennifer at the courthouse. It was an imposing building in downtown Anchorage with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. We waited in a hallway outside the courtroom until our case was called. Patricia arrived with her own attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Brandon Fitzgerald. He worked for a firm that specialized in HOA law, which apparently was a real specialty that people paid good money for. Judge Raymond Sullivan presided over the hearing. He was an older man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses who looked thoroughly bored until Jennifer began presenting the facts of our case. His expression shifted to one of disbelief as she explained Patricia's demands and the attempted seizure. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Sullivan interrupted. "The HOA president tried to physically remove a financed vehicle from your client's private property?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jennifer confirmed. "With a tow truck and hired personnel." The judge turned to Brandon Fitzgerald. "Counselor, What possible legal theory supports your client's actions? Fitzgerald cleared his throat. Your Honor, the Mountain Ridge HOA covenants include provisions requiring residents to contribute to community safety and maintenance. The board interpreted these provisions to include participation in a neighborhood watch program. Using privately owned financed vehicles, the judge asked skeptically. The board believes that community safety overrides individual property concerns, Fitzgerald said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced by his own argument. Judge Sullivan removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. That's one of the most creative interpretations of HOA authority I've heard in my 20 years on the bench. And by creative, I mean completely unsupported by law. He granted the restraining order immediately, prohibiting Patricia and the HOA from attempting to seize my Snowmachine, from entering my property without permission, and from imposing any fines related to the patrol program. He also ordered that any fines already assessed be rescinded, and that the HOA pay my legal fees. Furthermore, Judge Sullivan added, looking directly at Patricia, I'm strongly encouraging you to review your HOA's bylaws with competent legal counsel before you attempt any similar actions. HOAs are granted limited authority over common areas and architectural standards. They are not granted authority to confiscate private property, regardless of how that authority is rationalized. Patricia's face went through several shades of red during the judge's speech, but she remained silent. We filed out of the courtroom, and I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. That went better than expected, Jennifer said as we walked to the parking garage. Usually, these cases drag on for months. So it's over, I asked hopefully. The restraining order is in place, and you're protected, she said. But keep documentation of everything. If Patricia violates the order or retaliates in any way, we'll go back to court. I should have known Patricia wouldn't let it go that easily. She was too proud and too convinced of her own authority to accept defeat gracefully. 2 weeks after the hearing, I started noticing small acts of retaliation. My mailbox was knocked over one night. Garbage was scattered across my lawn. My driveway marker was stolen. Nothing that could be definitively traced back to Patricia, but the timing was suspicious. Then things got worse. I received a notice that the HOA was conducting a comprehensive property inspection, and that my home had been cited for 19 separate violations. The list was absurd. They claimed my fence was 1 inch too tall. My mailbox was the wrong color. My garage door needed repainting. My landscaping rocks were not approved varieties. The violations went on, each carrying a fine of $100. Jennifer reviewed the citations and shook her head. This is clearly retaliatory. Half of these aren't even real violations, and the other half are completely subjective. We need to document everything and potentially file a harassment complaint. But before we could take action, something unexpected happened. Linda, Patricia's assistant, called me on a Sunday evening. She sounded nervous. "Quentin, I need to talk to you," she said quietly. "Can we meet somewhere private?" We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in South Anchorage, away from our neighborhood. Linda arrived looking stressed, her eyes darting around like she expected Patricia to jump out from behind a plant. "I can't do this anymore," Linda said once we sat down. "Patricia is out of control, and I have proof of what she's been doing." She pulled out a folder stuffed with documents. Inside were copies of emails, meeting minutes, and financial records. Linda explained that Patricia had never actually held a proper board vote about the Snowmachine patrol program. She had simply decided on her own and then falsified the meeting minutes to make it look official. The 2 other board members had no idea what she had done. "There's more," Linda said, her voice dropping even lower. Patricia has been embezzling HOA funds. Look at these expense reports. She showed me records of purchases Patricia had made using the HOA credit card. Thousands of dollars spent at high-end restaurants, retail stores, and even a spa in Hawaii that Patricia had visited last summer. All of it charged to the HOA and disguised as board expenses or community outreach. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I'm tired of being complicit," Linda said. "And because I think Patricia is planning something else against you. She's been on the phone with some people I don't recognize, talking about permanent solutions and making examples. It scared me." I thanked Linda for the information and immediately forwarded everything to Jennifer. She contacted the other two HOA board members, Steve Morrison and Rachel Chen, Marcus's wife. They were shocked to learn about Patricia's fabrications and financial misconduct. An emergency board meeting was called for the following Tuesday, this time with proper notice to all residents. The community center was packed when I arrived. Word had spread about Patricia's embezzlement, and people were angry. The meeting hadn't even started yet, and residents were already calling for her resignation. Patricia arrived late, probably hoping to make a dramatic entrance, but instead she walked into a room full of hostile faces. Steve Morrison, who worked as an accountant, stood at the podium with a thick binder of financial documents. "Before we begin," Steve announced, "I want to make it clear that Rachel and I had no knowledge of the activities I'm about to discuss. We were kept in the dark by our board president, and for that, we apologize to all residents." He proceeded to outline Patricia's financial misconduct, displaying spreadsheets on the projector screen that showed unauthorized expenses totaling over $40,000 over the past 2 years. The room erupted in outrage. "This is preposterous," Patricia shouted, finally finding her voice. "Those are all legitimate expenses for HOA business." "Really?" Steve said calmly. "So the $3,000 you spent at a Honolulu resort was HOA business? The designer handbags from Nordstrom? The dinners at fancy restaurants with no other board members present?" Patricia's face went pale. Those were networking events, building relationships with other HOA professionals." "In Hawaii," someone yelled from the crowd. "Our HOA is in Alaska." Rachel Chen stood up next. "We've also discovered that Patricia unilaterally implemented the Snowmachine patrol program without proper board approval. She falsified meeting minutes to make it appear that Steve and I voted in favor of it. We did not." The mood in the room shifted from anger to fury. People started shouting for Patricia to resign immediately, but Patricia, true to form, refused to back down. "You're all overreacting," she insisted, her voice shrill. "I have been working tirelessly for this community, and this is the thanks I get. I'm not resigning. You'll have to vote me out, and good luck getting the required majority." Steve Morrison looked uncomfortable but determined. "Actually, Patricia, given the evidence of financial misconduct and falsification of official documents, the board can remove you immediately for cause." "Rachel and I have already voted. You're no longer HOA president." "You can't do that," Patricia shrieked. I'll sue all of you." "Sue us for what?" Rachel asked. "For discovering that you embezzled community funds. Please do. I'm sure the district attorney would love to hear about it." That stopped Patricia cold. The mention of criminal charges seemed to finally penetrate her bubble of entitlement. She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the community center, but not before turning to glare at me. "This is all your fault," she hissed. "If you had just followed the rules, none of this would have happened." "The rules you made up," I called after her. "Those rules." Patricia slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. The meeting continued without her. and the residents voted unanimously to pursue criminal charges for embezzlement and to hire a forensic accountant to determine the full extent of the stolen funds. I thought that would finally be the end of it, but Patricia had one last desperate play. 3 days later, I came home from work to find my garage door open and my snow machine gone. I immediately called the police and Jennifer. Officer Sarah Mitchell arrived within 20 minutes. She took my statement and examined the garage. There were no signs of forced entry, which was strange until I remembered that Patricia, as former HOA president, had access to gate codes and master keys for common areas. She might have made copies of resident keys at some point. "This is definitely theft," Officer Mitchell said, taking notes. "Given the history you've described and the restraining order, this sounds like escalating harassment. Do you have any proof of ownership?" I provided copies of the title, financing agreement, and insurance policy. Officer Mitchell photographed everything and issued a case number. Then she made a call to check something. "Interesting," she said after hanging up. "A snow machine matching your description was reported being stored at a private warehouse in Eagle River about an hour ago. The warehouse owner said a woman matching Patricia Newman's description rented a unit yesterday and moved a large machine into it this morning. We drove to the warehouse with a second patrol car following. The facility was off the Glen Highway, one of those storage places with rows of garage-style units. The owner, an older man named Tom, led us to Unit 47. Lady said she needed to store some equipment temporarily, Tom explained. Paid cash for a month in advance. Officer Mitchell knocked on the unit door. "Anchorage Police, open up." There was silence, then the sound of movement inside. Finally, Patricia's voice came through the door. "Go away, this is private property." "Madam, we have probable cause to believe there's stolen property in that unit," Officer Mitchell called. "Open the door now or we will open it forcibly." The lock clicked and Patricia cracked the door open, her face defiant. "I'm storing my property. That's not illegal." "It is when the property isn't yours," Officer Mitchell said. She pushed the door open further, revealing my Polaris switchback inside. "Mr. Vance, is that your snow machine?" "Yes," I confirmed, pointing to the custom blue striping and the small dent on the left side where I had bumped a tree last winter. "That's definitely mine." Patricia tried to argue. "He wasn't using it properly. It should have been available for community patrols. I was just securing it until he came to his senses." "Madam, you're under arrest for theft in violation of a restraining order," Officer Mitchell said, pulling out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Patricia's expression went from defiant to shocked to desperate in about 3 seconds. "Wait, you don't understand. I was doing this for the community. For safety. You can explain that to the judge," Officer Mitchell said, securing the handcuffs. "Turn around, please." Watching Patricia get arrested should have felt satisfying, but honestly, I just felt tired. This whole mess had been so unnecessary. All she had to do was accept that she didn't have unlimited authority, but her ego wouldn't allow it. The warehouse owner helped me load my snow machine onto a trailer and I drove it home. Jennifer met me there, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've seen HOA disputes get nasty before," she said, "but this is something else. Embezzlement, harassment, theft, violating a restraining order. Patricia's looking at serious charges." The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Patricia was arraigned on multiple charges including grand theft, embezzlement, harassment, and contempt of court for violating the restraining order. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she somehow managed to post, probably by draining whatever money she had left. The forensic accountant hired by the HOA discovered that Patricia had actually stolen closer to $60,000 over 3 years, not $40,000 as initially believed. She had set up a fake vendor account and paid herself for services that never existed. It was a relatively unsophisticated scheme, which was why it eventually came to light once someone started looking. Steve Morrison and Rachel Chen worked overtime to repair the damage Patricia had caused. They issued formal apologies to me and several other residents who had been unfairly targeted. They rescinded all the bogus citations and fines, and they completely rewrote the HOA bylaws to include better oversight and to explicitly prohibit the kind of overreach Patricia had attempted. Linda was offered the position of HOA manager on a proper salary with clear job responsibilities. She accepted and proved to be far more competent and reasonable than Patricia had ever been. Patricia's criminal trial was set for the following spring. In the meantime, she became something of a pariah in the neighborhood. Her husband, a quiet man named Robert who worked in IT, filed for divorce shortly after her arrest. He told Marcus that he had no idea Patricia had been embezzling money, and that he was humiliated by her behavior. Several residents told me they had noticed Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior over the past year, but hadn't wanted to get involved. She had become obsessed with control and had started seeing threats everywhere. The Snowmachine patrol idea had apparently been inspired by a Facebook post she had seen about neighborhood watch programs, but she had twisted it into something completely unreasonable. Winter deepened, and life in Mountain Ridge slowly returned to normal. I used my Snowmachine regularly without any interference from anyone. Marcus and I occasionally took rides together up to Hatcher Pass, enjoying the pristine backcountry and the freedom of being away from all the drama. One Saturday in late February, Linda stopped by my house. She looked nervous, clutching a folder similar to the one she had shown me at the coffee shop months earlier. "I found something else," she said. "I was going through old files and discovered that Patricia had been planning the Snowmachine thing for almost 6 months. She had diagrams of patrol routes, schedules, everything, and she specifically targeted your machine because it was the newest and nicest." The folder contained printouts of emails between Patricia and some company called Northern Security Solutions. She had apparently contacted them about starting a private security service using resident-owned snow machines and planned to charge the HOA $10,000 per month for management services. In reality, she would have been pocketing most of that money. She was going to use community resources to make herself rich while pretending it was all about safety, Linda said, disgusted. "The woman has no shame." I thanked Linda for the information and passed it along to the district attorney's office. It provided additional evidence of Patricia's fraudulent intent and strengthened the prosecution's case. The trial finally began in April. The weather had warmed slightly, and the snow was starting to melt, revealing all the detritus that accumulates over an Alaskan winter. I was called to testify on the second day of proceedings. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that gave everything a slightly yellowish tinge. Patricia sat at the defendant's table looking smaller and older than I remembered. Her lawyer, Brandon Fitzgerald, had dropped her as a client, and she had been assigned a public defender named Michael Torres, who seemed overwhelmed by the volume of evidence against his client. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Reeves, walked me through the timeline of events, starting with the initial notice about the Snowmachine patrol program. I explained how I had financed my Polaris through Arctic Federal Credit Union, how I used it for work transportation, and how Patricia had attempted to seize it despite having no legal authority to do so. And did you at any point give Miss Newman permission to take your snow machine? Amanda asked. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I specifically told her multiple times that she had no right to my private property. During cross-examination, Michael Torres tried to suggest that I had been uncooperative and that Patricia genuinely believed she was acting in the community's best interest. Did Miss Newman ever seem malicious in her intent? He asked. I thought about that carefully. I don't think malicious is the right word. Delusional, maybe. She seemed genuinely convinced that being HOA president gave her power that she simply didn't have. But her beliefs don't change the fact that she stole my property. Other witnesses testified over the following days. Steve Morrison and Rachel Chen explained how Patricia had deceived them and falsified records. The forensic accountant detailed the embezzlement scheme. Officer Sarah Mitchell described finding my snow machine in the storage unit and arresting Patricia. The evidence was overwhelming, and Patricia's defense basically boiled down to, I thought I was helping. Michael Torres argued that his client had made poor decisions but hadn't acted with criminal intent. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberations, they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts: grand theft, embezzlement, contempt of court, and harassment. Patricia showed no emotion when the verdicts were read, just stared straight ahead with a blank expression. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the interim, I tried to process everything that had happened over the past 6 months. What had started as an absurd notice on my garage door had escalated into a full-blown criminal case that had destroyed Patricia's life and nearly ruined mine. Marcus and I talked about it one evening over beers at my kitchen table. You think she'll actually go to prison? He asked. Jennifer thinks so, I said. The embezzlement alone carries a sentence of up to 10 years. Add in the theft and the restraining order violation, and the judge has a lot of options. It's wild, Marcus said, shaking his head. All because she couldn't handle not being in control of everything. The sentencing hearing was packed with residents from Mountain Ridge who wanted to see how the saga would end. Judge Sullivan, the same judge who had granted my restraining order, presided. He listened to victim impact statements from several residents who had been affected by Patricia's embezzlement. The HOA had been forced to implement a special assessment to cover the stolen funds and legal fees, costing each household an extra $800. When it was time for sentencing, Judge Sullivan looked directly at Patricia. Miss Newman, you held a position of trust in your community. Residents elected you to manage common resources and enforce reasonable standards. Instead, you betrayed that trust in multiple ways. You stole money that your neighbors had contributed for the betterment of their community. You harassed residents who disagreed with you. You made up rules and falsified documents to support your own agenda. And when you were held accountable, you escalated your behavior by committing theft and violating a court order. He paused, shuffling papers on his bench. I've read the pre-sentencing report and the letters submitted on your behalf. I understand that you have no prior criminal record and that you've been involved in community service in the past. However, the pattern of behavior here is deeply troubling. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was sustained, deliberate misconduct over several years. Judge Sullivan sentenced Patricia to 5 years in prison for the embezzlement charges, with additional concurrent sentences for the other offenses. She would be eligible for parole after 3 years with good behavior. He also ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA and to me for the legal fees I had incurred. Patricia finally broke down when the sentence was announced, sobbing into her hands while the bailiff approached to escort her into custody. Her family members in the gallery looked devastated. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything she had put me through. She had done this to herself, but it was still sad to watch someone's life implode so completely. As I left the courthouse, several reporters tried to get comments. The case had attracted media attention as an example of HOA overreach gone criminally wrong. I declined to speak with them and drove home, ready to finally close this chapter of my life. The following week, the Mountain Ridge HOA held a special meeting to elect a new board president. Steve Morrison was chosen unanimously, and he immediately implemented reforms to prevent anything like Patricia's reign from happening again. Financial audits would now occur quarterly instead of annually. All board decisions required unanimous votes and public notice. And most importantly, the bylaws were amended to explicitly state that the HOA had no authority over privately owned vehicles, equipment, or other titled property. Spring turned to summer, and life genuinely returned to normal. I continued working my rotation at the North Slope, using my snow machine during the remaining weeks of snow coverage, and then switching to my truck as the weather warmed. Sam and I took long walks along the coastal trails, and I tried not to think about the bizarre conflict that had consumed so much of my energy. In June, I received a check from the Alaska Department of Corrections. Patricia had begun making restitution payments from her prison job earnings. It was only $50, a tiny fraction of what she owed, but it was something. Jennifer said the payments would likely continue for years, maybe decades before the debt was fully repaid. Marcus and his wife Rachel hosted a neighborhood barbecue on the 4th of July. It was a beautiful evening with clear skies and temperatures in the mid-60s, perfect by Alaska standards. Most of the Mountain Ridge residents attended, and there was a sense of relief in the air, like we had all survived something traumatic together and could finally relax. Steve Morrison gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and promising that the HOA would focus on its actual responsibilities: maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and enforcing reasonable standards without overreach. "We're a community, not a dictatorship," Steve said to applause, "and we're going to keep it that way." Linda, in her new role as HOA manager, had organized games for the kids and a dessert contest. She seemed happy and far less stressed than when Patricia had been in charge. She caught my eye across the yard and raised her lemonade glass in a toast. I returned the gesture. As the evening wore on and fireworks started popping in the distance over Cook Inlet, I found myself reflecting on the entire ordeal. It had been exhausting and infuriating, and at times genuinely scary when Patricia's behavior had escalated. But it had also revealed something important about community and standing up for yourself. If I had just complied with Patricia's initial demand, who knows how far she would have taken it? She would have continued her embezzlement, continued abusing her authority, and continued making life miserable for anyone who questioned her. By fighting back, I had inadvertently exposed her misconduct and helped restore sanity to the HOA. Of course, it hadn't been just me. Linda had provided crucial evidence. Jennifer had handled the legal aspects brilliantly. Steve and Rachel had stepped up to reform the board. Marcus and other neighbors had supported me throughout. It had been a collective effort, proof that one person's abuse of power could be countered when people worked together. I learned later through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia's ex-husband Robert had moved to Washington State for a fresh start. Their house had been sold to cover legal fees and restitution payments, and a young couple with twin daughters had moved in. They attended the barbecue and seemed lovely, blissfully unaware of the drama that had preceded their arrival. As fall approached, and the first snow began to dust the Chugach Mountains in the distance, I started preparing for another winter. I took my Polaris to the shop for maintenance, checked my financing account to see the balance continuing to drop with each monthly payment, and renewed my insurance policy. Everything was in order, everything was mine, and everything was as it should be. On a cold evening in October, I was organizing my garage when I found the crumpled notice that had started everything. The one Patricia had taped to my door demanding I surrender my snow machine. I had thrown it in a box of papers that day and forgotten about it. Now I smoothed it out and read through it again, shaking my head at the audacity. Sam wandered into the garage and nuzzled my hand, looking for attention. I petted him absently, thinking about how different things could have been if Patricia had simply accepted that she had limits, if she had worked with residents instead of trying to dominate them, if she had been honest instead of greedy. But those were not the choices she made. She chose control over cooperation, theft over honesty, and ultimately destroyed herself in the process. It was a cautionary tale about unchecked authority and the importance of accountability, especially in the mundane world of homeowner associations, where people often assumed no one was watching. I filed the notice away in a folder Jennifer had suggested I keep with all the documents from the case. Just in case, she had said. Just in case Patricia appealed or violated probation or did something else unexpected. I hoped that wouldn't happen, but I was prepared if it did. Winter settled in fully by November, bringing the early darkness and heavy snow that define Alaska for months each year. I used my snow machine regularly, sometimes for work transportation, and sometimes just for the joy of riding across pristine backcountry under the northern lights. Each time I fired up the engine and felt the machine respond smoothly, I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond simple ownership. This was mine. I had worked for it, paid for it, and defended it when someone tried to take it away. And that feeling, that knowledge that I had stood my ground and won, was worth all the stress and conflict. The Mountain Ridge HOA sent out its annual holiday newsletter in December. It was 3 pages of updates about community events, financial reports, and upcoming projects. Everything was transparent and reasonable. There were no demands for property seizures, no threatening fines, no manipulation. Just a well-run organization doing what HOAs were supposed to do. Linda included a note at the end thanking residents for their support during the transition and wishing everyone a peaceful holiday season. She mentioned that the HOA had finished the year with a modest surplus, thanks to careful budgeting, and that the surplus would be used to improve playground equipment at the community park. On Christmas Eve, snow fell softly outside my windows while Sam dozed by the fireplace. I sat in my favorite chair with a glass of whiskey, thinking about the year that had passed and the lessons learned. It had been one of the strangest, most frustrating years of my life, but I had survived it with my sanity and my snow machine intact. Marcus called to wish me Merry Christmas and mentioned that he had heard Patricia might be transferred to a lower security facility given her good behavior. I felt ambivalent about that news. Part of me was glad she was adjusting to her consequences, but another part would never fully forgive the stress and expense she had caused. "You think she'll ever understand what she did wrong?" Marcus asked. I considered that question carefully. I don't know. Some people are so convinced they're right that they can never admit they were wrong. Maybe prison will give her time to reflect, or maybe she'll just spend her sentence believing she was persecuted for trying to help. Either way, she's not our problem anymore, Marcus said. How does it feel to have your boring HOA back? I laughed. Boring is underrated. I'll take boring over dramatic any day. We talked for a while longer about work, families, and plans for the new year. After hanging up, I walked to my garage and looked at my snow machine sitting there undisturbed. The title was safely filed in my office, showing my name as the registered owner, with Arctic Federal Credit Union listed as the lien holder. My insurance policy was up to date, covering me for liability and comprehensive damage. Everything was documented, legitimate, and mine. The absurdity of Patricia thinking she could simply take it still amazed me. What had she imagined would happen? That I would just shrug and let her commandeer a $20,000 machine that I was still paying off? That there would be no legal consequences for theft? That being HOA president granted her some kind of immunity from basic property law? Her sense of entitlement had been so profound that it blinded her to reality. And when reality had pushed back, she had doubled down instead of backing off, escalating until she ended up in prison. It was a perfect example of how ego and stubbornness could ruin a life. As the new year began, I found myself moving forward with a renewed appreciation for normalcy. I paid my HOA dues on time without complaint. I attended community meetings occasionally, but without the tension that had defined them during Patricia's reign. I worked my rotation at the North Slope, came home to Sam, and enjoyed the simple pleasures of life in Alaska. Jennifer called me in February to let me know that Patricia's appeal had been denied. She would serve out her sentence as determined by Judge Sullivan. The case was finally, truly closed. "How are you doing?" Jennifer asked. "Really?" "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. It was hell while it was happening, but I learned a lot about standing up for myself and not backing down when I'm in the right. "That's exactly the right lesson to take from this," Jennifer said. "Too many people cave to HOA pressure even when the HOA is clearly wrong. You fought back and exposed real corruption in the process." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about everything that had happened since that first notice appeared on my garage door. The confrontation at the community center, the attempted seizure, the court hearings, Patricia's arrest, the trial, the sentencing, and finally, the slow return to normal. It had been a journey I never asked for and never wanted, but one that had taught me valuable lessons about community, authority, and the importance of documentation. If I hadn't had clear proof of ownership through my title and financing records, the situation might have been much more complicated. Patricia might have been able to muddy the waters and claim some shared community interest in the machine, but the paperwork had been crystal clear. The snow machine was mine, financed through a private lender and insured through a private company. There was no ambiguity, no loophole she could exploit. And when she tried to take it anyway, the law came down on her side. Spring arrived again, completing the cycle. The snow melted, revealing brown grass and mud and all the accumulated dirt of winter. I switched from my snow machine to my truck for daily transportation and scheduled the Polaris for end-of-season maintenance. The technician at the shop commented on how well I maintained it. "A lot of people beat these things up," he said, examining the engine, "but yours is in great shape. You must take care of it." "It's an investment," I explained, "and something I use every day during winter. Can't afford to let it fall apart." He nodded approvingly and continued his inspection. Everything checked out fine, and I arranged for storage until the next snow season. As I watched them wheel my snow machine into the climate-controlled storage area, I felt a sense of completion. The machine had become symbolic of something larger during the fight with Patricia. It represented personal property rights, the limits of HOA authority, and the principle that organizations couldn't simply take what belonged to individuals just because they claimed some community benefit. Those principles had been tested and ultimately upheld, both in court and in the court of public opinion. Mountain Ridge had moved on from the Patricia Newman era. The new board under Steve's leadership was functioning smoothly. Linda was doing an excellent job as HOA manager, keeping residents informed and addressing concerns promptly. The community felt like an actual community again, not a dictatorship. In May, I attended the annual HOA meeting where Steve presented the financial reports and outlined plans for the coming year. The budget was balanced, reserves were healthy, and several infrastructure improvements were scheduled. Everything was transparent and reasonable. Several residents commented on how much better things were compared to a year ago. During the public comment period, an older woman named Dorothy raised her hand. She had lived in Mountain Ridge for 20 years and had known Patricia since she moved to the neighborhood. "I just want to say," Dorothy began, her voice emotional, "that I'm glad we got through last year. It was awful watching someone we trusted turn out to be so corrupt. But I'm proud of how this community responded. We didn't let one bad leader destroy what we built together." There was applause and murmurs of agreement. Steve thanked Dorothy for her comments and echoed the sentiment. "We learned some hard lessons," he said, "but we came out stronger, and we put safeguards in place to make sure nothing like that happens again." As the meeting ended and people filed out into the long Alaskan evening light, I chatted with neighbors about summer plans, salmon fishing, and the million other normal topics that fill everyday conversation. No one mentioned Patricia or snow machines or court cases. That chapter was closed, relegated to history. Driving home that night, I thought about the unpredictability of life. A year ago, I had been preparing to fight an increasingly unhinged HOA president over my property rights. Now I was thinking about which river to fish and whether I needed to repaint my deck. The dramatic had given way to the mundane, exactly as it should be. Sam greeted me at the door with his usual enthusiasm, and I took him for a walk along the bike path that wound through the neighborhood. The sun hung low on the horizon, not setting so much as hovering, providing nearly constant daylight that made Alaska summers so magical. Neighbors waved as we passed, kids played in yards, and everything felt peaceful. I never saw Patricia again after the sentencing. She was transferred to Hilland Mountain Correctional Center outside Anchorage, where she would serve the bulk of her sentence. According to the occasional updates that filtered through the neighborhood grapevine, she was working in the prison library and keeping to herself. I hoped she was doing some genuine reflection on her choices, but I honestly didn't spend much time thinking about it. My focus was on my own life, my own work, my own responsibilities. The snow machine sat in storage, ready for the next winter season. My finances were in good order, with the balance on my loan decreasing steadily. My relationship with the HOA was cordial and professional. Everything that Patricia had tried to disrupt had been restored. As summer progressed, I took a week off from work and went on a fishing trip with Marcus to the Kenai Peninsula. We caught salmon, hiked through bear country with appropriate caution, and camped under skies that never truly darkened. It was exactly the kind of restorative experience I needed after the previous year's stress. "You ever wonder what Patricia's doing right now?" Marcus asked one evening as we sat by the campfire. "Not really," I admitted. "I hope she's learning something, but that's her journey." "Mine is right here." Marcus poked at the fire with a stick. "Rachel still feels guilty about not noticing what Patricia was doing sooner. I keep telling her it's not her fault, that Patricia was deliberately hiding it, but she struggles with it." "Patricia fooled a lot of people for a long time," I said. "That's what con artists do. They're good at manipulation and misdirection. No one should feel guilty for being deceived by someone who was actively lying. We talked into the night about responsibility, trust, and how communities function. It was the kind of deep conversation that happens when you're away from civilization with nothing but time and nature around you. By the end of the trip, I felt like I had truly processed everything that had happened and was ready to move forward without any lingering resentment. Fall arrived quickly, as it always does in Alaska, and before I knew it, the first snow was falling again. I retrieved my Polaris from storage, changed the fluids, and took it for a test run. Everything worked perfectly, the engine purring smoothly as I glided across fresh powder. That winter was blissfully uneventful. The HOA sent out its regular newsletters with updates and reminders. Snow removal services kept the roads clear. Community events happened on schedule. Everything functioned exactly as a well-run HOA should function, and I appreciated the boring efficiency more than I ever had before. Years would pass before I fully appreciated the broader implications of what had happened with Patricia Newman and the Mountain Ridge HOA. Her case became something of a cautionary tale in HOA management circles, used as an example of how authority could be abused and how proper oversight was essential. Legal professionals used it in seminars about property rights and HOA limitations. But for me, it was simply a strange chapter in my life that had tested my resolve and ultimately strengthened my understanding of my own rights and responsibilities. I owned my Snowmachine free and clear by the 3rd year after the trial, making the final payment to Arctic Federal Credit Union with genuine satisfaction. The title arrived in the mail with no lienholder listed, just my name as the sole owner. I framed that title and hung it in my garage, a reminder of the fight I had won and the principle I had defended. Sometimes visitors would ask about it, and I would tell a condensed version of the story. Most people were shocked that an HOA president would attempt something so brazen. "Don't they know there are laws?" they would ask. "Laws only matter when people enforce them," I would respond. "That's what I learned. You have to stand up for yourself because no one else will do it for you." That lesson has served me well in many areas of life beyond HOA disputes. It taught me to document everything, to know my rights, to seek professional help when needed, and to never back down when I'm clearly in the right. Those are valuable skills in any context. The Mountain Ridge neighborhood thrived under new leadership. Property values increased as the community developed a reputation for being well-managed and resident-friendly. New families moved in, attracted by the reasonable HOA fees and sensible governance. The nightmare of the Patricia Newman era faded into memory, occasionally mentioned but no longer defining the community's identity. I still live in that house, still own that Snowmachine, still walk my dog through the neighborhood in the long summer evenings and the dark winter afternoons. Life goes on with its mixture of routine and surprise, challenge and comfort. The HOA sends its newsletters, collects its dues, maintains its common areas, and leaves residents alone to live their lives as they choose. Which is exactly how it should be, and exactly what I fought for when someone tried to take what was mine. The title showed it was financed and insured privately, clear proof of ownership that no inflated sense of authority could overcome. In the end, truth and law prevailed over ego and theft. And my Snowmachine still runs perfectly, carrying me through Alaska winters with reliable power, a constant reminder that some battles are worth fighting and that standing your ground can make all the difference.